The government is not backing down from a push for an inquiry into China's handling of the coronavirus, despite a threat from the Chinese ambassador. Let's go live to our political reporter, Tom Connell. He's in Canberra. Tom, the economic threat was pretty clear, but it hasn't deterred the government or Labor for that matter.
Yeah, it's a very united push, one for a global independent inquiry into COVID-19. Now, clearly that would focus on the role of the World Health Organization and also the role of China, what the Chinese Communist Party knew and when and what was done to try to suppress the virus, or perhaps in cases what was not done. Now, the US is right behind this push very publicly. Some of the countries in Europe and the EU as well have said it's not the time to apportion blame. Privately, they clearly understand, though, why Australia is going down this path. China's response, of course, has been to push back, and the stakes did increase today from the Chinese ambassador in this interview with the Australian Financial Review. They mentioned that they don't believe this is the time, that there is still a very real threat of the virus. Also, that this was just Australia pandering to the thoughts of Washington. Curiously, that they weren't even conceding this did come likely out of a Wuhan wet market, the coronavirus, and saying that even though the epidemic broke out, quote, in China, it could have come from the US. Clearly a bit of an indication there that they're referring to an earlier claim by a Chinese official that this was some sort of plot by the US. This has been refuted, of course, by health officials, Laura, right around the world. But the stakes really increased, as we often see with Australia, with an economic threat out of China. The quote coming from the ambassador was, "I think in the long term, if the mood is going from bad to worse, people would think, why should we go to such a country that is not friendly to China? The tourists may have second thoughts. The parents of the students would also think whether this place, which they found is not so friendly, even hostile, whether this is the best place to send their kids here." Now, we know Chinese students are a huge part of the model, the financial model for Australian universities, how big Chinese tourism is, tourism in Australia is as well. And also there was a threat about eating Australian beef and wine. So a pretty clear threat, but not one that has the Australian government backing down in any way. A statement from the Foreign Minister Marise Payne has said, "We reject any suggestion that economic coercion is an appropriate response to call for such an assessment, and what we need is global cooperation." We do sometimes see Australia tiptoeing around Chinese sentiment and feelings, not so here, calling out this economic threat. And it was something Labor did as well, the shadow spokesperson, Penny Wong, this morning on radio.
I'd make the point that the Chinese ambassador spoke about not wanting to resort to recrimination, division and suspicion, and what I'd say is that's precisely why we are supporting a call for an independent inquiry. Australia has to assert its national interest. We have to press what is right, what we believe is right for us and for the international community, and making sure that humanity understands how this virus started is the right thing to do.
So Labor right behind this push. We know Labor did have some things to say before the election about the handling of the China relationship, the Australia-China relationship. Clearly on board here with saying this inquiry makes sense. We need to know what happened and, of course, what that could mean for future threats. Australia and China, the relationship is going to be a fascinating one to watch. The timing of this, the Australian government isn't saying this needs to happen right now. This has been part of the pushback from other nations and China, but they won't go away in their determination for some sort of independent inquiry eventually to find out what happened.